The air in Professor Sarah Mitchell's office was thick with dust and anticipation. Rain pelted against the windows of the ancient theology building at Columbia University, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the silence that had fallen between her and the young man sitting across from her desk. His name was Thomas Wright, a graduate student whose research had taken an unexpected turn. "Professor, I think everyone's been wrong about 666, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper, as he pushed the weather manuscript toward her. "This changes everything." Sarah adjusted her glasses and studied the fragile parchment. A renowned biblical scholar with a rebellious streak, she had built her career challenging orthodox interpretations, but even she wasn't prepared for what lay before her. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her fingers hovering over the ancient text. The university acquired it from a private collector in Egypt. It was part of a collection of forgotten texts, similar to the Nag Hammadi Library. No one's bothered to translate it completely until now. Sarah's eyes widened as she read Thomas's translation. The document contained a commentary on the Book of Revelation, but unlike anything endorsed by mainstream Christianity. It spoke of 666 not as a simple mark of evil, but as something far more complex, a symbol with layers of meaning that had been systematically suppressed for nearly 2 millennia. "The beast isn't who they think it is," Thomas continued, his eyes alive with the thrill of discovery. "This text describes 666 as the number of the material realm, a representation of cosmic ignorance rather than a specific evil entity." Sarah leaned back in her chair, the implications washing over her. "Thomas, do you realize what you found? This aligns perfectly with Gnostic cosmology, the belief that the physical world is an imperfect creation of the demiurge, not the true God." "Exactly," Thomas exclaimed. "And look here, it says the mark on the forehead and hand isn't a literal brand, but represents thought and action aligned with materialistic values." Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the room in a stark white glow. Sarah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the storm. If Thomas was right, countless generations had misunderstood one of the Bible's most infamous passages. "This could upend centuries of apocalyptic fear-mongering," she said softly. "But the theological establishment won't accept this easily. They've built too much on the traditional interpretation." Thomas's face hardened with determination. "That's why I came to you. You've never been afraid to challenge dogma." Sarah smiled, remembering her own battles with religious authorities. "No, I haven't. And I've got the hate mail to prove it." She stood up and walked to her bookshelf, pulling down an ancient tome. "You know, there have been whispers about this interpretation for centuries, but nothing this explicit." As she flipped through the pages, a small piece of paper fluttered to the floor. Thomas picked it up. It was a business card for Dr. William Kaplan, Director of Religious Studies at the Vatican Secret Archives. "An old friend," Sarah explained, "and perhaps our best chance at validating your discovery." Thomas looked uncertain. "The Vatican? Wouldn't they be the most resistant to this interpretation?" Sarah's eyes twinkled mischievously. "Sometimes, Thomas, the greatest secrets are hidden in plain sight, guarded by those who appear to oppose them most strongly." She glanced down at the manuscript again, her finger tracing the ancient symbols. "We need to be careful. Throughout history, those who've challenged established religious doctrine have often met with resistance." "Are you saying this could be dangerous?" Thomas asked. "Knowledge always is," Sarah replied, "especially when it threatens power structures built on specific interpretations of sacred texts." She pulled out her phone and began composing a message to Dr. Kaplan. "We leave for Rome tomorrow. Pack light, bring your research, and tell no one what you found." She looked up at him with intensity. "The world isn't ready for this yet, but they soon will be." As Thomas gathered his papers, thunder crashed overhead, and for a brief moment he wondered if they were meant to uncover this ancient secret, or if some truths were better left buried in the dust of history. The Vatican Library stretched before them like a cathedral of knowledge, its vaulted ceilings and mahogany shelves housing centuries of sacred wisdom. Thomas tried to mask his awe as Dr. William Kaplan led them through a series of increasingly restricted sections, his security badge opening doors Thomas hadn't even noticed existed. "Sarah, it's been too long," Kaplan said, his accent a curious blend of Italian precision and American casualness. Tall and distinguished with silver hair and penetrating gray eyes, he moved with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to keeping secrets. "When your message mentioned the number of the beast, I knew I had to see you immediately." Sarah matched his brisk pace. Thank you for the risk you're taking, William. I know this isn't exactly standard procedure. Nothing about our friendship ever has been, he replied with a wry smile. He glanced at Thomas. Your student has stumbled onto something that has fascinated me for decades. They arrived at a small, climate-controlled room deep within the archive. Kaplan locked the door behind them and activated a complex security system. The church's public position on Revelation 13 verse 18 is well established, he said, retrieving a worn leather box from a hidden safe. But what few know is that the Vatican has preserved alternative interpretations throughout history, including those aligned with what you'd call Gnostic thought. Thomas couldn't contain himself. You mean the church knows about these other meanings of 666? Kaplan fixed him with a measured look. Young man, the church is not monolithic. Within these walls are scholars who have dedicated their lives to understanding Scripture in all its complexity. Some interpretations, however, remain unofficial. He opened a box, revealing a fragmentary manuscript that appeared even older than Thomas's discovery. 2nd century, Kaplan explained, from a community in Alexandria. It describes 666 as the number of the cosmic prison. Sarah leaned closer. The material world as a prison for divine sparks. Classic Gnostic cosmology. Precisely, Kaplan nodded. And look here, this section discusses the mathematical properties of 666 as a triangular number. When reduced through sacred geometry, it connects to the number 8, which in Gnostic circles represents the Ogdoad. Thomas exclaimed, the transcendent realm beyond the 7 planetary spheres. Sarah shot him an approving glance before turning back to Kaplan. William, this confirms everything in Thomas's fragment. But why keep this knowledge buried? Why perpetuate the fear-based interpretation? Before Kaplan could answer, the door swung open. A stern-faced cardinal stood in the threshold, flanked by 2 security guards. Dr. Kaplan, the cardinal said coldly, this area is restricted even for you, and these visitors are not authorized. His eyes narrowed at the open manuscripts. What exactly is happening here? Kaplan stepped forward smoothly. Cardinal Severin, I was just consulting with Professor Mitchell on some obscure numerological traditions. Nothing to concern yourself with. The cardinal's gaze lingered on Thomas. The young man who's been asking questions about alternative interpretations of the apocalypse? The Vatican is not a playground for academic rebellions, Dr. Kaplan. With all due respect, Your Eminence, Sarah interjected, theological inquiry has always been central to the Church's mission. Some inquiries are better left dormant, Professor, Cardinal Severin replied. There are truths mankind is not ready to embrace. He gestured to the guards. Please escort our guests out. And Dr. Kaplan, the Holy Father will want to speak with you. As they were led away, Kaplan pressed a small USB drive into Sarah's hand. Everything I've collected on this subject, he whispered. And a name, Elena Vasquez, National Library of Spain. Find her. His expression grew grave. Be careful, Sarah. Not everyone who seeks this knowledge does so with pure intentions. Outside in St. Peter's Square, as tourists snapped photos in the golden late afternoon light, Thomas turned to Sarah. What now? Sarah clutched the drive in her pocket. Now we go to Madrid. And we find out why some of Christianity's most powerful figures want this interpretation of 666 to remain hidden. Neither noticed the man in the dark suit who had followed them from the archives, his phone pressed to his ear as he kept a careful distance. Madrid in autumn carried a crispness that reminded Sarah of New England, though the ancient architecture of the Spanish capital told a different story. The National Library of Spain stood dignified and imposing, its neoclassical facade a testament to centuries of preserved knowledge. Elena Vasquez is a cryptographer, not a theologian, Sarah explained as they climbed the stone steps. She specializes in ancient numerical systems and their hidden meanings. Thomas frowned. How does a mathematician fit into all this? The ancients didn't separate mathematics from spirituality the way we do, Sarah replied. Numbers were seen as divine principles, cosmic building blocks. She lowered her voice. And if our fragments are correct, 666 is far more than just a scary number. It's a mathematical key to understanding the nature of reality itself. The woman who greeted them in a private research room was younger than Thomas had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Professor Mitchell, Elena said, embracing Sarah warmly. William told me you were coming. I've prepared everything. She assessed Thomas with a quick glance. Your student has stirred up quite a hornet's nest. Elena led them to a table where diagrams, ancient texts, and modern mathematical formulas were carefully arranged. The number 666 has been misunderstood for millennia, she began, highlighting a triangular numerical arrangement. In Gnostic mathematics, it's a triangular number that reduces to 36, which itself reduces to 9. 9 is the number of completion in many traditions. Completion of what? Thomas asked. Of the material cycle, Elena replied, her fingers tracing the pattern. Look at this manuscript. It's a commentary from a Sethian Gnostic sect. They saw 666 as representing complete immersion in the material world, the furthest point from divine consciousness. Sarah studied the text. The beast isn't a person or a political system. It's a state of being, Elena finished. Complete identification with the physical realm and its values, forgetting our divine origin. The mark is simply the mindset that sees material existence as the only reality. Thomas felt a chill. So all those fears about literal marks and microchips. Missed the point entirely, Elena nodded. The real warning in Revelation is spiritual, not physical. It's about not surrendering your consciousness to materialistic values. She pulled out another diagram, a complex geometric pattern showing the number 666 transforming through various mathematical operations. This is where it gets truly fascinating, she said, eyes bright with excitement. When you apply sacred geometry to 666, it eventually leads to the number 8, which in Gnostic systems represents the Ogdoad, Sarah whispered, remembering Kaplan's words. Exactly. The transcendent realm beyond the 7 planetary spheres. Elena looked at them intently. The very symbol of cosmic evil contains within its mathematical structure the key to transcendence. That's the secret the Orthodox tradition either missed or deliberately obscured. Thomas sat back, mind reeling. So the beast's number actually contains the path to escape the beast system? That's incredible. It's dialectical thinking, Sarah mused. The poison contains the antidote. A loud crash from the hallway interrupted them. Elena moved quickly to the door, locking it. We're not alone, she said grimly. Since William contacted me, I've noticed people watching the library. She began gathering the most crucial documents. There's a back exit through my office. Who would be after us? Thomas asked, helping to collect the materials. The same people who suppressed this knowledge for centuries, Elena replied. Some within the church who believe these interpretations threaten their authority. Others with more occult interests. The door handle rattled violently. There's more to the manuscript, Elena said hurriedly, pressing a small leather-bound book into Sarah's hands. It speaks of a physical location, a temple where this teaching was preserved in symbolic form. It's in Turkey, near ancient Ephesus, where Revelation was first received. As they slipped through Elena's office toward the emergency exit, Sarah grabbed Thomas's arm. This isn't just about academic research anymore. We're uncovering something people have died to protect or to suppress. Thomas nodded gravely. I'm starting to understand why the traditional interpretation has been so fiercely defended. Fear is a powerful control mechanism. As they emerged into a narrow alleyway behind the library, Elena pointed them toward the busy Grand Via. Find the Temple of Wisdom in Ephesus. The final piece is there. The sound of pursuit echoed behind them as they melted into the Madrid crowd, the ancient secret of 666 now a burning weight in their possession. The Turkish coast glimmered golden in the late afternoon sun as Sarah and Thomas made their way through the ancient ruins of Ephesus. Tourists clustered around the famous Library of Celsus and the Grand Theater, but Sarah led them away from the main attractions, following coordinates from Elena's leather-bound book. The early Christian community in Ephesus was diverse, Sarah explained as they navigated a less traveled path. John wrote Revelation here, but he wasn't the only spiritual voice. Gnostic groups thrived alongside more Orthodox believers. Thomas wiped sweat from his brow. How has this temple remained hidden when Ephesus is one of the most excavated sites in the world? Not all temples were built above ground, Sarah replied with a knowing smile. They stopped at what appeared to be an unremarkable hillside covered with Mediterranean scrub. Sarah checked the coordinates again and began examining the rocky ground more carefully. Here, she said finally, brushing away dirt to reveal a worn stone with a faint symbol, an 8-pointed star within a triangle. The Ogdoad within the material trinity. This is it. It took them nearly an hour to locate and clear the hidden entrance, a narrow passage that would have remained invisible to casual observers. As they descended worn stone steps into the darkness, Thomas flicked on his flashlight, revealing ancient walls covered with mathematical symbols, geometric patterns, and faded inscriptions. "It's like stepping into another world," he whispered. The passage opened into a circular chamber. Sarah gasped as their lights revealed an intricate mosaic floor depicting a cosmic map, 7 concentric circles surrounding a central 8-pointed star. "The 7 planetary spheres," she breathed, "and beyond them, the Ogdoad, the realm of pure spirit." Thomas trained his light on the walls, where a series of symbols formed a continuous band around the chamber. "Look at this sequence. It's showing 666 broken down mathematically, transformed through sacred geometry until it becomes 8, Sarah finished. Just as Elena said. In the center of the room stood a small altar with a stone tablet. The inscription was weathered but still legible, ancient Greek letters painstakingly carved into the surface. Sarah translated aloud, "The number of the beast is the number of a human, for it measures the prison of the senses. 6 is the number of incompletion, ever falling short of divine completion." Thrice repeated, it signifies total immersion in material illusion. Yet hidden within this number lies the path of return. Those with wisdom will find in the very symbol of bondage the key to liberation. Thomas circled the room slowly. "It's saying exactly what Elena told us. The mark isn't something forced upon us. It's a state of consciousness we accept willingly when we embrace purely material values." Sarah nodded. "The forehead represents thought. The hand represents action. When both are aligned with materialistic priorities, we've essentially marked ourselves." "But there's more here," Thomas said, pointing to another inscription. "The archons guard the gates of the 7 spheres, demanding the password of materiality, 666. But the initiated carry within them the higher number that transcends the 7. A shower of dirt from the entrance interrupted him. They weren't alone. "We have company," Sarah whispered, quickly photographing the remaining inscriptions. Heavy footsteps echoed down the passage. Thomas dimmed his light, pulling Sarah behind a column. 2 men entered the chamber, both wearing dark clothes. One held a pistol, the other carried an electronic device that beeped softly. "They're still here," the armed man said in a thick Eastern European accent. "The heat signatures are clear." The other man approached the altar. "This is it, the source text. The Cardinal will want everything documented before we seal this place permanently." Thomas tensed to move, but Sarah held him back, pointing silently to a shadowed recess behind the altar, a narrow passage barely visible in the dim light. When the men moved to the far side of the chamber to examine the wall inscriptions, Sarah and Thomas slipped silently toward the hidden passage. It was narrow and rough, clearly not part of the temple's original design, perhaps an emergency escape route, or a later addition. They crawled through darkness for what seemed like eternity before emerging into a small cave with an opening to the hillside, now bathed in moonlight. "Who were those men?" Thomas asked as they caught their breath. "I don't know," Sarah replied, "but they mention a cardinal. Severin must have sent them." Why is this interpretation so threatening that people would go to these lengths to suppress it? Sarah gazed out at the distant lights of modern Ephesus. "Think about it, Thomas. The traditional view of 666 creates fear of an external enemy, a literal Antichrist figure or system. It keeps believers looking outward for threats, dependent on institutional protection. But the Gnostic view turns the focus inward," Sarah continued. "It suggests that the real battle is within consciousness itself. It empowers individuals rather than institutions. It transforms a terrifying prophecy about the end times into a profound teaching about the human condition and our spiritual journey." She pulled out her phone, examining the photos she'd taken. "There's more here than we've decoded. The final revelation awaits us." As they made their way cautiously down the hillside, the ancient wisdom of the temple echoed in their minds, a secret preserved for 2 millennia, now unearthed in a world that had never needed it more. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at Columbia University. The crowd was a curious mix, theologians, journalists, conspiracy theorists, and ordinary people drawn by the provocative title of her lecture, 666, The Hidden Truth. Security was tight. The threats had begun arriving as soon as the lecture was announced, but Sarah refused to be silenced. Thomas sat in the front row beside Elena Vasquez, who had fled Spain after their narrow escape. Of Dr. Kaplan, they had heard nothing since their hasty departure from the Vatican. For nearly 2,000 years, Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, we've misunderstood one of the Bible's most infamous passages. The number of the beast isn't a warning about a future dictator or a microchip implant. It's something far more profound and far more personal. The screen behind her displayed images from the Temple of Wisdom, alongside translations of the ancient texts. The Gnostic understanding of 666 reveals it as a symbol of complete identification with the material world, a consciousness that recognizes only physical reality and material values. She clicked to the next slide, showing the mathematical transformation of 666. But here's what's truly remarkable. Within this very symbol of spiritual bondage lies the key to transcendence. When understood through sacred geometry, 666 transforms into 8, the Ogdoad, symbol of spiritual awakening beyond the 7 spheres of material existence. A murmur rippled through the audience. The mark on the forehead and hand isn't a literal brand, but represents thought and action aligned with purely materialistic values. The warning in Revelation isn't about avoiding some external evil, but about maintaining spiritual consciousness in a world that constantly pulls us towards surface-level existence. As Sarah continued, Thomas noticed a commotion at the back of the hall. Cardinal Severin had entered, accompanied by 2 men he recognized from the temple. But instead of fear, Thomas felt a strange calm. The truth, once released, couldn't be contained. The final inscription we discovered in Ephesus, Sarah was saying, contained the most revolutionary insight of all. She paused, surveying the rapt audience. It stated that 666 and the divine number are reflections of each other, not opposites, but different perspectives of the same reality. She showed the last image, a complex geometric pattern from the temple floor that, when viewed from above, formed 666, but when viewed from another angle, transformed into a radiant star. The material world isn't evil, Sarah explained. It's simply incomplete, a partial perspective. The beast is not out there, it's the limited consciousness that can't see beyond physical existence. And the divine isn't absent from a material world, but hidden within it, waiting to be recognized. In the back, Cardinal Severin slipped quietly out the door. After the lecture, as attendees clustered in excited discussion, Thomas approached Sarah. I've been offered a research position at the Institute for Esoteric Christianity, he said. They want to continue documenting these alternative interpretations. Sarah smiled. And I've been summoned to the Vatican. Thomas looked alarmed. After everything that's happened, it could be a trap. Maybe, she acknowledged. Or maybe there are those within the church ready to reconcile these different streams of understanding. William Kaplan sent the invitation. He's alive and apparently back in favor. Elena joined them, her expression serious. This knowledge doesn't belong to any one tradition. It's universal, part of humanity's spiritual heritage. As they exited the building into the crisp evening air, a text message appeared on Sarah's phone, a series of numbers forming an ancient equation, followed by the words, "The journey has just begun. There are older texts beneath the Vatican. The demiurge is not what we thought. W." Sarah looked up at the night sky, where stars glittered like distant promises. In the Gnostic tradition, she said softly, knowledge isn't just information, it's transformation. We haven't just discovered an ancient secret, we've awakened something that's been dormant for centuries. Thomas followed her gaze upward. The real revelation of 666 isn't about the end of the world. No, Sarah agreed. It's about the beginning of understanding. The beast's greatest deception was convincing us to fear external enemies rather than looking within. As they walked across the campus, the ancient wisdom echoed in their minds. The number of the beast contained the key to transcending the beast system. The very symbol of bondage held the secret of liberation. And in a world increasingly consumed by materialism and fear, this forgotten truth had never been more essential. The mark was not something to be feared but understood, a reminder that the choice between material values and spiritual awareness was made anew in every human heart, every single day.